Every year, the world consumes billions of kilograms of coffee, cultivated in endless rows across massive commercial plantations. Yet out in the wild, the original plant species that make this industry possible face an imminent risk of extinction. You look at the menu in a premium cafe, and the options seem limitless. You can buy beans labeled Kona, beans from Sumatra, or Blue Mountain. The branding creates the illusion of rich, global biodiversity. This diagram maps out those market names. Watch what happens when we trace their genetics. They all collapse into a single, aggressively narrow root line. Premium Coffea Arabica cultivars max out at a mere 15% genetic divergence. That extreme genetic uniformity is a massive biological liability. If a new agricultural plague or a rapid climate shift can kill one plant, it can kill almost all of them. This tree maps Arabica cultivars. At the top right, a rare hybridization occurs. Two wild species, Coffea canephora, known as Robusta, and Coffea eugenioides, crossed to create Arabica. This happened exclusively in the border forests of Ethiopia and South Sudan. For centuries, these traditional land races, selections from wild populations, survived deeply adapted to their local cloud forests, completely cut off from the rest of the globe. To understand how a plant with such a hyper-local, fragile genetic code ended up growing on 4 continents, we have to track some of the most successful agricultural smuggling operations in history. By the 15th century, Sufi monks in Yemen were using roasted coffee for late-night vigils. The imamat in Yemen quickly realized the value of this crop and established an absolute commercial monopoly over the global supply. They strictly prohibited the export of live plants or fertile seeds. The already narrow genetic pool remained locked to the Arabian Peninsula. Then, around 1670, an Indian monk named Baba Budan smuggled 7 live seeds out by taping them to his chest. Shortly after, Dutch merchants secured their own live tree. They planted these clippings in India, and later in Java, establishing the foundational lineage we now call Typica. European colonial powers took this singular, highly inbred Typica line and cloned it on an industrial scale across their occupied territories. Today, nearly half of the world's modern toffee stems from this one smuggled lineage, permanently locking in the first massive genetic vulnerability. The other half of the coffee market traces back to a second heist. In 1715, the French secured a tiny selection of trees directly from Yemen to plant on an island in the Indian Ocean, then called Bourbon. The genetic bottleneck here was even tighter. Of the 60 trees loaded onto the ship, only a few survived the perilous ocean voyage, and historical records indicate just one single tree survived planting in the island's soil. That single tree's descendants, now known as the Bourbon cultivar, eventually made their way to Latin America. It produced 20 to 30% more fruit than Typica strains, driving farmers to plant it everywhere. But it carried the exact same lack of genetic diversity. Looking back at the family tree chart, check the vast Americas block on the left. Dozens of modern names, Caturra, Mundo Novo, Pacamara, all trace back via these complex lines to just those 2 roots, Typica and Bourbon. In the late 19th century, a devastating fungal disease known as coffee leaf rust swept across the globe. Because this uniform, inbred crop had 0 natural defenses, entire national economies collapsed as their plantations were wiped out. The global agricultural panic that followed coffee leaf rust forced a harsh realization. Farmers could no longer just plant old seeds. The industry had to actively engineer new biological defenses. Agronomists turned to a controversial solution. They took the fragile, delicious Arabica and crossed it back with its hardy, disease-resistant wild parent, Robusta. This process created interspecific hybrids, plants with names like the Timor hybrid and Catamor. Today, these crossbreeds serve as the primary frontline defense for modern coffee farmers. But today, breeders face an agonizing trade-off. Because of Robusta's harsh, bitter traits, increasing a hybrid's disease resistance and yield almost inevitably degrades the cup quality of the final product. Initially, these hybrids save the industry temporarily, but with the rust fungus rapidly mutating and the planet warming, shuffling the same limited DNA is a losing battle against time. Agronomists have mathematically exhausted the genetic potential of the old Typica and Bourbon lines. The new frontier of coffee science relies on stepping outside the plantations entirely. Researchers are now desperately searching for forgotten, wild coffee species to inject entirely new DNA into the stagnant pool. In December 2018, scientists hiking through the forests of Sierra Leone rediscovered Coffea stenophila, a wild plant that hadn't been seen by researchers in nature since 1954. Stenophila possesses the high-temperature climate resilience of Robusta, but it matches the premium flavor profile of Arabica.